Mr. Cox. Wow.
Oh, I
There
still
he
don't
is.
recognize him.
Yeah, someone, it was Michael Yates. He said that we need to update the picture for the promo because you don't look the same anymore. So we need to work on that.
We're working on that.
Yeah. Welcome, sir. Thank you for coming on.
Plan to get new headshots made, I guess, at some point.
Okay.
So before my segment, I was listening to the live stream, and I gotta say, the guy was Yves LaRose.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like I just let him have my job because he's so passionate and persuasive. I'm like, I'm doing that. We're doing that. That's governance. Oh my gosh, that is governance. That's so cool. And I'm getting excited all over again. I thought I was excited before.
Right. I know we were getting pumped up as well. Yeah. The heat is rising. What can you say?
Yeah. Yes, and rightly so.
Yeah. We have a long list of questions for you this week, and also some discussions to jump into. I think you had the list, but we'd also like to help. We'll read it off for you if you'd like, whichever you prefer.
Super. Why don't you go ahead and read it?
Okay, hang on one second here.
Take your time. And by the way, while you're looking for it, I want to make a quick note, reminding folks that everything I say on this show or in chat or wherever, it's just me personally. I'm not now, nor am I ever a spokesperson. I cannot commit the project to do anything. I am not speaking on behalf of my employer. I happen to know a lot of stuff because I'm immersed in it every day. And it feels like a service to the community to come out and just like answer questions that you could find the answers to on your own if you looked all the places I look every day, but it's just quicker and easier for everyone if I share it this way. So personal opinions and all the information you receive, probably, I think all of it's public domain. It's out there. It's in the repository. It's in Medium and so forth.
And
so
for anyone
that's my disclaimer, and I'll probably say it again before we're done.
It sounds good. I was going to say, if anyone's still not sure, they should just go read your Telegram name. It says about the same thing.
That's right. Thomas, all opinions mine, Cox.
And so the first question is actually from EOS Nation, strangely enough, but they said, right, what do you think of the idea of imposing set term limits on block producers?
Term limits on block producers, interesting question. So anytime anyone proposes a particular approach or position, I always say, what's the underlying interest that they're trying to serve? What's the problem to be solved? Or let's back up a step. And so term limits might do one of two things. It might help prevent block producers from getting too sort of sleepy and complacent, if that were a risk, or it might shake up a cabal if a cabal were to form somehow. And I'll answer the second part first. If there were, this is again my personal opinion, if block producers had discretion over what they did, I'd be a lot more concerned. As it is, the only thing block producers can do is take transactions out of the mempool and apply them to the prior state to make the next state, and produce a block, sign it, and pass it on. Now that involves a lot of technical lifting, and it's not trivial to do, but it's extremely deterministic. And so it's like, how is that political, or where's the ideology under that? In theory, someone could maybe choose not to pick transactions from someone they didn't like, but that just means that person would wait 3 seconds for the next block producer to come around on the rotation. So I don't even see how that could hurt anybody. The other one has to do with complacency, and I have a different thought that we're floating, and it may not make it into the June release, but we are discussing it. I think it's in GitHub already. Is the idea of introducing a chaos monkey. And so the chaos monkey it's got a great name, so you got to love it for that. It's something that was particularly, I think, brought to prominence among DevOps folks by Netflix, because Netflix has this very complex software as a service that's on all the time in real time. And so the chaos monkey goes around and it just randomly kills off background processes to force recovery to always be practiced. And a modest version of that could be to go in and randomly kick a block producer out of the rotation for 5 minutes and force a standby producer to pop in. And that might not happen very often. In part, we don't want that for performance reasons, because your light clients have to completely dump and resync some information when the block producers change. But that might be a good way to test failover, the failover from one block producer to another, not within a block producer.
If I'm not mistaken, Thomas, that's also an industry concept. Like, for example, in AWS, they have a service like that would go in and
Do they? I did not know that.
I believe so.
See, I learn things all the time. I come here and I learn things. It's wonderful. So yes, you get the idea. There's this standard concept of when you've got complex interacting processes that are supposed to be robust and supposed to have failover, that you force them to fail over before there's a disaster by just going in and randomly knocking them out of action to make sure that your recovery process is constantly being exercised so that you've got a good one.
Yeah.
Because as we say in human response, I have a sort of personal interest in like disaster recovery, disaster responsiveness, and there's a common saying that in an emergency, you don't do what you ought to do, you do what you've practiced. Mm-hmm. And what have you practiced? If you practice nothing, you'll probably do nothing, or you'll do something random. And that's why you want to do things like rehearse evacuating your house in case there were a fire, teach your kids what the fire alarm sounds like and where to go and what to do. Little home safety tip there.
Stop, drop, and roll.
So, there you
go. So this concept is also interesting because, like you said, it reduces that downtime. Right. But it has a lot of parallels to the cloud universe as well too. You have cloud services, and you want to keep those up. So
yeah. So term limits, right now, to me personally, feels like a too heavy of a hand to accomplish whatever is desirable, and it might have side effects that are undesirable. And I'd be more inclined to go with a chaos monkey approach. And or keep a weather eye out for misbehavior by block producers, and then use the arbitration process to bring them to heel. That might be sufficient. Remember, block producers don't have a lot of discretion. They're not policymakers. Now, policymakers, you might have a really strong case for term limits there. But I liken the block producers more to like the power company or the solid waste disposal company. They do this job, they do it really well. It's a very well-defined job. They need to be really reliable. And within those parameters, you'd like them to control their costs. That's kind of it.
So Thomas just called block producers the trash men of EOS. Is that correct?
Well, I was going to go with the electric company, but sure.
Oh, okay.
I meant municipal utilities generally.
His opinions are his own.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Well, here's the next question for you, Thomas.
Now all the block producers are mad at me.
We're going to have some Telegram kickback here, I'm sure, some lashback. But so the next question is from Gerard. He sent this over an EOS governance channel, talking about legit transactions by malicious actors and whether those legit transactions can be rewound. So, for example, if you have Jim, and say Jim stole some money from George, and then he didn't. So basically, he did a legit transaction after stealing money.
Right. Yeah. You like steal a bike and you sell the bike.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, haha. So what do you do with the new owner, quote unquote, of the bike, right? Because they didn't know it was stolen. They pay good money for it. And the short answer is, well, what happens in the real world? And in the real world, if you bought stolen goods, you didn't really buy them because you didn't get title to them from someone who had title to sell it. So when the police come around and show you the serial number and say, you have a police, this was reported stolen, can you describe the person who you bought it from? It's like, no, I didn't. It's like, dude, take cell phone photos, get his, car license number, only buy things from people who are reputable. If you're not sure if it's their bike, don't, it's a suspiciously good deal. There's a reason for that. Yeah. I promise you, those rules apply just as well on the chain as off because we believe in property rights. And if your stuff is stolen from you, it's still yours.
Yeah.
And if the thief sells it, quote unquote, it's not really, now it might be hard to track down. I'm not saying it would be trivially easy, but in terms of right and wrong versus easy and hard, in the world of right and wrong, it's still your bike.
Yeah.
And if you can find it later, you still get to claim it. And the police will be on your side, provided you have a police report. So obviously keep track of your stuff. Fortunately, the blockchain gives us a very auditable situation. So the short answer is, on-chain, it should behave exactly as off-chain. The true owner should get their stuff back, and if you bought something that wasn't the seller's to sell, you might be out of luck, or at the very least, you'd have to chase down the thief and get your money back. And of course, we do our best to help you because all transactions are on-chain. But dude, what are you doing transacting with a shady customer who has low reputation and didn't bond it, and you didn't ask for, proof of title? I mean, it's the blockchain. Come on, this should be easy to prove who owns things.
So it wouldn't necessarily need to go to arbitration, but it,
If it did, the true owner gets it, and if you're the one who bought the stolen item, it's not yours, and you will be required to return it, and you can then attempt to get your money back from the guy who, quote unquote, sold it to you. But that might be hard because thieves are slippery.
Okay, so let's move on to another question. We have Crypto Lions out there, and he's got a question about Shelling One, which appears in your Telegram name. Everybody, I guess he wants to know about what that is, and secretly so do I.
All right, well, the book's across the room. Hold on a second.
Kevin probably already knows this.
Let's not make any golden goose jokes this time, there, Blue Jays.
I'm done with those.
Yeah, that's
silly. I knew the question was coming, and yet I left the book across the room. So here's the book, right? It's called The Strategy of Conflict by Thomas C. Schelling. Classic book on game theory. A lot of game theory prior to his book was about cooperative games and Tragedy of the Commons and Prisoner's Dilemmas and all, quote unquote cooperative games. His was about people in strategy where the parties are in conflict. And it completely revolutionized the way people thought about game and game theory in a broader context, and it really matured the field. And I was fascinated by some specific things that he says about communities. It goes like this. Let's say you've got two neighboring islands where everybody hunts rabbits, and hunting rabbits is something you do in pairs, and it's like a prisoner's dilemma. So if you're familiar with prisoner's dilemma, I'll just cut to the chase and say, on one island, everybody cooperates. So if you go to that island and you hunt rabbits, you'd better cooperate too, because when you defect, which is the other move in a prisoner's dilemma, you'll profit briefly. It'll soon get around that you're not playing by the community's rules there, and no one was going to want to play with you anymore, and you won't ever find another partner again. But you go to the other island where they do the exact same rabbit hunting game, but everybody defects. And if you went there and you tried to do the cooperation move, you'd be a laughingstock, and everyone would want to play with you because they could then rip you off. And so each island has clustered around a default behavior that community has settled on. And if you were to go there, you'd find out pretty quickly you'd better go where they are. And each of those two settings are shelling points, that is, natural rallying points for groups who might not even necessarily communicate explicitly about their strategy. It's just obvious what to do. And so I noticed this in the context of vote buying and corruption on blockchains and on distributed proof of stake chains, where there's a temptation to pay for votes. That is, you vote for me as block producer, and I make all this huge amount of money, and then I share some of the bounty with my voters, thus unnecessarily driving up the cost of block production and completely destroying the utility of voting as a method of choosing good people, because you're no longer choosing good people, you're choosing lucrative partners and ripping off the commons. Now, there are communities where that is normal. Mm-hmm. And we have to decide, is the EOS mainnet launched by the community and run by the community going to be a no vote buying, low corruption, high integrity chain, or the other kind? And you got to pick one. Like, you got to pick which island you're going to go hunt rabbits on. And so I'm committed to making it as clear as possible. Number one, the rules, the default rules that we're publishing, that the community has the option to launch with, will forbid vote buying. We'll have provisions for punishing vote buying. And I want to make the case morally and financially and economically that tolerating vote buying in a DPoS blockchain harms that chain. It drives up the cost, it drives down the quality, and it normalizes a behavior that is very bad, because what you're saying is essentially people can have a position of public trust, which is what we're talking about with block producers. They may not have discretion, but they do have power, and they're in a position of public trust, and if they wield that power in any way other than as contracted, they can really mess things up. And it's a really bad precedent. So shelling one is in there. That's the shelling point I'm talking about, is that we rally around the value of voter integrity, vote integrity, and that we all vote for low-cost, high-quality, honest block producers who will never, ever pay a bribe.
But we do have the free will to select whichever island we want to go on. So as like
Absolutely.
You
Hey, all it's going to come out of the software process is a default constitution.
Yeah.
And it's GitHub. You can fork that. You can change these numbers. You can change anything. You can change the 5% inflation. You can change the 21 block producers. You can change anything you want to. Launch your own chain if you want to. And the trick will be then getting people to participate.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. And so moving on. So Crypto Alliance also asked another good question. They had 3 good ones.
Yeah.
And for a business DApp, confidentiality is very important, and businesses will not want their internal information stored on a blockchain. So broadly speaking, what are the possibilities? Are we talking about dApps that should plan to store their data elsewhere, or should we expect EOS to implement some sort of data obfuscation that will give selective access to the business's information?
Right. This is a big challenge. It could be very damaging to a retailer, say, to have all of his customers listed right there where his competitors can see. And they might then get, oh, Gary, I'll save you 5% over that other person. It's like, it could be really wicked. And at the same time, the blockchain gives you unprecedented global reach and trustworthiness and traceability and auditability. So what do you do? These are all DApp level concerns, and they're very important ones. I'm not aware currently of anything on the EOS.io software roadmap to provide obfuscation, at least not in the June release. Having said that, I know that there is talk about bringing zero-knowledge proofs in, possibly as libraries, possibly as third-party implementation. So if that's of concern to you, I would definitely look into what I think it's called the IRYO, IRYO, is looking to do medical records on a blockchain, which if you're thinking privacy, you're going to go like, oh my gosh, how could you do that? And their answer is encryption and zero-knowledge proofs, among other things. So they've got something up their sleeve, and I haven't read their architecture closely enough to know exactly how they do that, but it looks really interesting. So I absolutely would be very careful. Assume that anything you put directly on the blockchain is going to be globally readable. Don't necessarily trust all encryption, just because forever's a long time, and maybe quantum computers, maybe some encryption breaks in 5 or 10 years. Is that data going to be okay to have out there in public view? So be cautious. Store things off chain, hash that, and store the hash on the chain. Maybe. I can't give you architecture advice in a generic way, because architecture is always tied to the application in question. So yes, the core blockchain will not solve all those problems for you. You're going to have to solve some of them for yourself, and or find people who are offering that service. It's going to be a very important service, I predict.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And they also asked about any new thoughts on the block producer rewards cliff, quote unquote, between number 21 and number 22.
Yes, there is new thinking afoot, which I am not at liberty to reveal in detail. I believe Dan will be coming out with something maybe end of the week, maybe next week. We're thinking about putting out a governance roadmap that will talk about some of that. The short answer is, which we have talked about publicly, so I can say here, we want the standby producers to not just sit around waiting to be elected. We actually have a job for them to do, which is to be read-only repeaters who provide public access to the chain and broadcast the chain to anybody who wants it, and can collect transactions and forward them on up to the block producers, which requires a higher level of presence. And so we're contemplating some sort of per diem reward for every standby that would cover their costs sufficiently to keep them in business. So the block producers would still get more, but instead of having this cliff, there'd be much more of a ramp, maybe. We do know that block producers have more work and have a higher level of performance requirements, so they'll still get, I'm sure, paid more. I'm confident we'll get paid more than standbys, but we want to make sure that the standby role is a role that people can perform and be compensated enough by, at least by the default settings, that a community who runs the default settings would provide enough revenue to standbys to keep them going.
And that 1% cap you mentioned last week has caused.
I think that was actually, I probably shouldn't have shared that because I don't think that was a fully thought out. I think what we're really trying to say is we want a floor underneath folks so that their revenue doesn't fall so low they can't do their job. But we also want to have, if not a cap, maybe like an umbrella top or I don't know, some way to keep the block producer role from becoming so absurdly lucrative. If, say, the EOS token price went way up, we don't want block production to be so lucrative that it tempts people into bad behavior or tempts bad actors to come in and buy votes or do other things.
Okay, that's good information because a lot of the community has been kind of up in arms about the 1% cap, and they've been running calculations as to how it could be feasible and this and that. So,
yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that a hard-coded percentage is looking less like the proper direction if our design goal is to make block production and standby producer roles affordable to be in. They should pay enough to keep you going and comfortable, but not like wacky, absurdly lucrative where you start pulling in Bitcoin style behavior where people throw elbows in each other's faces and lie, cheat, and steal and do other undesirable things that harm the ecosystem as a whole and prevent that platform from running, because we're really here to create a platform to write things on top of, and that's where the attention should be. Block production should be boring and stable, is my opinion.
Sounds good. So there's Rashman after all. No, I'm just kidding. So let's move forward. Don't quote that. It's a disclaimer and so on and so forth. So
Kev, I saw you have a question on the sheet here.
I do. Yeah, my question's the next one here. I submitted it. Go ahead there, Bluejays. You can quote me if you'd like.
Okay. So Kevin from EOS Go asked the question, what criteria do you want to see on the block producer report?
That's a great question. So what that question translates into for me is what makes a healthy block producer? What should voters care about? And I think you guys have covered a lot of it. But I'm going to think out loud here, and maybe they're already I haven't got the criteria memorized, so maybe these are all covered. But transparency and independence are really important. So I would love to see proof that the block producer wasn't owned by anybody else, wasn't secretly part of some whale that owns 8 or 12 block producers. I want to see that you're independently owned and operated. I want to know who the owners are. And I want to know where your servers are, because that matters for things like latency and geographic diversity, which matters to me as a voter. And I want to know what your code of conduct is. I want to know how I can count on you. So, what will you choose not to do? What will you put in writing that you won't do? Maybe you'll say you will never pay for votes. One thing that we're toying with is making it easy to have a voluntary opt-in, totally voluntary thing for block producers who would like to take part in it, to post a bond for good behavior, that if they broke their word in whatever way they gave their word, that bond could be forfeit. And that's not going to be mandatory, and it's not in any of the system contracts, but it's probably going to be in one of the default contracts we'll deliver in June, we think. It's not a committed feature, though.
Okay.
So that's all I've got for you on block production.
Okay, sounds good. And actually Sam Zapoznik in the thread, and you partially answered this already, both in the thread and just a moment ago, but he was talking about how some block producers, or one EOS stack in particular, they were on earlier, they listed their location as decentralized on the block producer report /global. And he's worried about it becoming common for block producers to list themselves as decentralized. And therefore, right. And you just said you were talking about how you'd like to know where the servers are. How do we handle a situation like this?
Sure. And so it's entirely possible in the world we live in for an organization to be decentralized. Totally true. And at the same time, you need two physical realities. One is there's got to be an address that somebody could deliver a letter to. So there's you have to have some administrative presence. Now, maybe in this brave new world we're into, that's an electronic presence and it's an email address and not a physical one. I don't know. I'm aware that the nation of Malta is right now considering legislation that it would allow Maltese law to recognize DACs as having a legal personality, just like a corporation or an individual does, which would put them on the cutting edge of evolution as far as I'm concerned around DACs. So that's pretty neat. And but servers, however, have a physical presence. Even cloud servers are located in a data center somewhere that the cloud provider has, because CPUs still have physical existence, and therefore it's in a jurisdiction, which means it can be seized, impounded, blocked by a firewall, whatever, of some nation state. I want to know which nation state has its hands around that data center where your server is. So even if administratively you really are so decentralized that there isn't an address, or you don't want to have one, or maybe you're actually owned by, you've done an airdrop. Lord knows that's probably a bad idea. And by the way, the reason I say that it might be a bad idea is because when you have shares or some coin that's used for decision making in a for-profit organization, you're probably creating a security, and you need to then understand what securities laws are. And I know just enough about it that I know that I don't ever want to make a token that's a security, and we're actually going to great lengths to make sure that the EOS token that exists in the blockchain that the community will launch will very carefully not be a security. That's an important design consideration for us in our constitution writing. So the original question was decentralized. Yeah, dude, your server is somewhere. I want to know where.
And Mr. Yates is actually mentioning, he's talking about Ravi. They have a great lawyer who's very versed in crypto, and
cool.
Hopefully they can sort of lead the way when it comes to figuring out the securities laws all around the world and so on and so forth. So I guess it's another wait and see situation, I suppose. But
yes.
Yeah, so I guess you can't be in one country, you can't be in another country, you can't be in Malta, you cannot be. Otherwise, you're just being a Malteser, I guess.
Hardy har. Moving on.
Hey.
So we have Bill Boz, which is a name we haven't seen in a while. It's good to see him back. And he was talking about the design principles of the Constitution that you posted. And he was referring to number 1, which is the negative rights portion. He said that you're committed to using the language of negative rights exclusively in the entire draft, and he's asking why. I'm very interested on your thoughts on this. And second, as it seems that you as soon as you include the contents of number 5 for positive rights, you're empowering the user, block producers, and others, right? So he's basically asking about why negative rights is used so prominently.
Yeah. And by the way, I haven't finished the draft, and I said I want to make the whole thing negative rights, and I'm going to try real hard. But here's the reason negative rights are so important. A negative right is different from a positive right in this. Negative rights are, 1, always reciprocal, and number 2, can be respected even by someone who's dead. Meaning I can respect all of your negative rights by doing nothing. Nothing to you, nothing for you, nothing with you, on you, at you, nothing. Now that doesn't mean I'm not going to help you out in a crisis, but you don't have some right to demand that of me through the Constitution. You might have a right to demand it of me because of some deal you and I have made of mutual aid. That's why mutual aid societies are huge and tremendously important, because then you do have someone to call on who kind of owes you one because you owe them one because you've made that private arrangement. But if we were to create a blockchain or blockchain settings that when you launch it had positive rights, that very quickly leads you into having some sort of security, because a positive right mandates that somebody then has a positive obligation. So who has the positive obligation? Well, the fiduciary or the director or the owner or the whoever. And that gets really ugly really fast. Whereas with negative rights, we're basically a bunch of people who've agreed not to hurt each other, and then within the boundary of that, then we privately arrange how we're going to help each other, which we're already doing. Look at the block producers, look at the DAC people, look at this massive, vibrant community actively helping each other, not because we have to, but because we choose to. Mm-hmm. And that's huge, because if I don't have to help you and I help you anyway, that was my free will, and now you know the content of my character, as opposed to if I'm being forced to help you, you don't know anything about me other than maybe I'm afraid of being punished. So we're creating a negative rights-centric constitutional backbone in large part, to prevent being deemed a security, which you could be if you have positive rights baked into the lowest levels. And it also creates an extremely open playing field for people to create their own individual small group, large group self-organizations, self-organized collectives of various kinds, where people really can cooperate and they can rely on that base layer to protect their negative rights, the right to not have your property taken away from you, right? The right to not be harmed, the right to not be lied to and defrauded. All the kinds of things that you absolutely should be able to count on your basic layer of civilization to provide you.
There's another question from Bill Boz. So he's curious if there's something that he's missing concerning the concept of enclave. He says, from his understanding, the self-partitioning of the communities with common goals is inevitable. Yeah,
inevitable and desirable. Absolutely. I mean, if you expect, however many tens of thousands of people, or however many it's going to be who are going to have accounts, are not going to cluster into smaller groups that get to know each other, they're all going to work, 10,000. I'm going to have 10,000 equal relationships. Nobody does that. Mm-hmm. Right? You've got one best friend and 5 close friends. Why? Because you're a human and that's how your brain is structured. And you haven't got more than 150 people in your head, maybe fewer. I'm probably at 75 because I fill this up with other things. And I'm just not very friendly, I guess. I don't know why it's such a small number for me. And that's called Dunbar's Number. And Dunbar's Number tells you how many human relationships the human brain can hold, where you actually can keep track without having to think too hard of do I owe them something? Do they owe me something? Are we in good relationship here? Which is why, by the way, every military on the planet has a certain size of a unit that's right about 150. It's why organizations like W.L. Gore build buildings that only hold 150 people, because they don't want people to be transactional in these small groups. They want them to be relational, and you can't do that with your brain beyond about 150. So of course, just human nature is going to cause us to create these enclaves of special rules. I'll give you one example. Someone was asking about the constitutional prohibition against lying, which was the only article draft I've published yet. They said, oh my gosh, it's going to destroy free speech, because someone's going to say, life begins at birth, and someone else will say life begins at conception, and one thinks the other is lying, and then they're going and then you can't have any dialogue. Okay, that's a legitimate point. And if I were concerned about that, and I were building an app that included, conversation on difficult topics, I would say, when you are using my DApp for difficult conversations, you release any claim you might have against someone disagreeing with you about basic facts. You don't get to go after them for lying just because they believe something different than you believe. Because, I'm confident if the origin of life could be proven definitively in a court of law, we would not be having the abortion ongoing chronic disagreement we've had for decades. So yes, we need free speech. Yes, we need a prohibition on lying. And every government under the sun outside of the blockchain deals with that. And so of course we will too. And I think one way to do that is just to say on my publication, or in my DApp, or in my forum, or my chat group, or whatever, here are the rules you agree to when you're in here. And you totally make it clear that people don't get to take each other arbitration because one person says global warming is real and the other one says you're a liar. Because that's not what arbitration's for, folks. Oh, by the way, you have to prove you were harmed as well.
Before we go on to the next question, can you go back to Dunbar's Number again? Where does that come from?
Yeah. There's a sociologist named Dunbar, and he actually got interviewed on, I think it might have been, it was a podcast I listened to, and I got to hear the guy talk. It was so cool, and I can't remember the name of the podcast. I'm so sorry.
Okay. Was it a book?
No. He's written about it. Dunbar. If you look up Dunbar's Number, you'll find it very quickly. And I'll tell you the backstory on that is that primates create troops that is, large multifamily or, extended family groupings of a certain size, and the size of the group maps directly to the size of the primate brain. The bigger the brain, the bigger the troop. And Dunbar is noticing that, going, what? And, did the math on how many grams the brain weighs in the average size, and just drew the line and said, the way the human brain is 150, up to 180 maybe. And obviously there's individual variation. I mean, we all know people who've got 200-300 people that they somehow stay in touch with. They're outliers, that's fine. And you want them on your sales team, by the way. But the average person has got about 150. We have room in our brains to track roughly 150 plus or minus whatever relationships with other humans, where you can remember without having to think too hard, are we friendly? Are we getting along? Do I owe them something? Do they owe me something? Do they like me? Do I like them? Are they any good at what they do? Like just off the top of your head. And if you were to scan through LinkedIn or some other place, maybe your phone, your address book, whatever, and said, who do I really know? Who could I call up out of nowhere and say, hey, it's me, it's Thomas Cox, how you doing? And they'd go, huh? Or, oh, Tom, hey, wow, it's been ages. Like, what's the number? Now for me, it's like 5, but for you, it might be, 20, 30, 50, whatever. And Dunbar's number predicts very accurately that in small groups, we have relationships, and when you get beyond the group, you start to have more transactional relationships instead of relational interactions, which, by the way, is core to a lot of the Austrian economists thinking about spontaneous order and extended order, and the reason that markets are so important. If I can't have enough of a relationship with you to know about you, I need to have a market relationship where the market tells me about you. And I can see through your reputation with other transactions how to transact with you.
So it's almost like you're delegating your
reputation. Yeah. Reputation is, in a village, everyone knows you, for good or ill. Beyond the village, people know you by your transaction reputation, which on the blockchain is forever. Which is why, by the way, never cheat people on a blockchain.
Good point.
Goes back to that reputation and also that question we talked about earlier, where someone steals from another person, a malicious actor. You can only do that once, and then it's on blockchain, and you can't get away with it again. It's
going to be very hard for anyone to try, even if you were, accused but never, convicted. People are going to look at that and you're like, oh, you're selling a bike. Oh, I see here. Oh, I'm not so sure. And somebody else who sells bikes who's very reputable might say, hey, you should definitely buy from me because look at this. It gets ugly fast, folks. When your reputation, your reputation belongs to the community because it's their opinion of you based on how you've been behaving. So behave yourselves.
Yeah. Reputation on blockchain, important. Sure.
Yeah. Well, reputation in general, isn't it?
We'd hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. What else you got?
So we have one from EOS Canada. Could you please walk us through in detail how the voting power mechanism works, i.e. 1 token equals 30 votes. Can 30 votes be applied to 1 BP?
Right. So the idea here is that there's how many votes you get to cast and how strong, if you will, that each vote is. So if I stake 1 token, I get to pick up to 30 block producers that I approve of. It's called approval voting. And I can scan through the list of block producer candidates and I can tick off up to 30. And they each get 1 more added to their vote total because I had 1 token that I staked for voting. Well, I staked it for bandwidth and I get to use it for voting. So let's say I go and I buy 9 more and I stake them for CPU or bandwidth, and now I can vote them. Well, great. I go to those same 30 and I tick them again. But guess what? Now instead of my having added 1 to their vote total, I've added 10 to their vote total because I've got 10 tokens. So you see, the number of tokens gives you the depth of how many votes, how many tokens count toward their vote total, and 30 is how many you can pick out. And you don't get to put like 3 here and 4 there. It's pure math. It's here's this long list running vertically of block producers, and then it's the same number. However many tokens you put in, they either get that or they don't. There's no partial voting.
Okay. Okay, and also there's another question from the thread that I missed in the email, but are there or will there be any mechanisms to encourage voting from token holders? And obviously payments and bribes and dividend sharing are out, of course, but
Right.
are there any other mechanisms?
There is nothing that I'm aware of that is even contemplated to encourage voting. People should vote because it's the right thing to do and because, frankly, it's pretty easy. And one of the ways it's going to be made pretty easy, I predict, is that people will come up with, they'll go to the EOS Go site or other places and they'll collect information on block producers. And here's what I would do if it were me, is I would say, please person, Fred, Joe, whoever, Chris, Randy, tell me what you care about in the block producer. And then I've got all these information about this maybe massive number of block producer candidates. Okay, based on your preferences, here are the people who score the highest based on my information and other people's information, which I've published and so on. Would you like me to cast these votes for you? And they can click a button, say yes, and it would prompt them for, please sign this transaction, and it would apply those votes. Now that's pretty easy. And even better is you can say, oh, here's a proxy person who votes the way you like. If you click here, you'll assign all of your votes to be voted by that proxy person who will keep you informed, and you can reassign that at any time. Then the proxy person's in there every month or so refreshing the votes. Now that becomes super easy, doesn't it? Now, should people be paid for that? No paying for votes. No giving value for votes. No. You should do it because you're a good citizen, because you care about the community, because you want to see good block production, and maybe I don't know if we'll find some way to, encourage it in other ways that are non-remunerative, like positive social pressure and encouragement. But that's as far as I think it should ever go.
And that actually brings up go ahead.
Well, someone was saying, there's places in Ireland or Scotland or wherever he was from that said, after you vote, if you cast your vote and you come out and they got the little sticker or whatever that proves you voted, they'll give you like a free beer. And I'm like, that might be going too far. But I kind of like the free beer idea, just personally. So I'm a little conflicted there. Yeah. My personal opinion, though.
We've heard about beers and blockchain after the meetups.
There you go.
We have a potential here, folks. There's actually been a question that is not mentioned here, but it's relatable. So the Turbo Tokens thing by Ava was put out a while back, and basically she was talking about how DApp owners, folks who have a DApp that makes, say, a lot more money for them, and they have a far more vested interest in making sure the network is healthy, should their votes be worth more, basically? Or is there some kind of mechanism that will make that happen?
Yeah. There won't be anything significantly new on the voting front between now and June. Just there's no time to bake in anything new. I know that we're thinking long term about, what else can we do to help make things be well balanced. There's some thoughts that Dan and I have shared privately that aren't ready to be published that might come out maybe in the governance roadmap, perhaps, that would be more elaborate, that would offer more than just token holder voting. There might be other criteria in the future, and that obviously, that if it's post-launch, it has to be adopted by the community. So there's no guarantee, even if it got proposed, that it would happen. But yeah, we're totally thinking about, what are all the ways that we can offer ideas to the community to make a stable, mature, long-lasting, healthy, balanced governance structure.
And we have another question here from Don Soul1 from the chat. And he talks about the recent move by Ripple, and they donated a lot of money to good projects, and it was applaudable, and it got a lot of publicity, even in mainstream media. They basically funded a whole bunch of projects for teachers around the U.S. Anyway, so he's asking about if there are any official or unofficial things on the horizon for EOS to go in that altruistic direction, and also maybe worker proposals. Could those be dedicated towards something like that?
Right. So what I'm hearing is that Ripple had a marketing budget, and they used their marketing budget wisely and got a lot of free publicity in exchange for looking virtuous, which is a great way to do marketing. And, I'm being a little snarky, but, that's, funding schools is like, please get more publicity, go for it, because we all benefit from better schools. So I'm not aware of any plans to do anything beyond creating public domain software and giving it to the community. I think that's pretty darn generous, and we were already committed to doing that. Post-launch, who knows? And as for worker proposals, if you were to look at, I keep going back to Dash because they have a really nice interface for their worker proposals. But you absolutely could propose, hey, I propose that we as a community spend X dollars on, shoes for kids in this village or to help teachers over there, whatever. And if you get the votes, you'll get the money. It's a question of, do people want that? And that's a community has to answer that. I couldn't begin to answer that.
Sure.
I guess we'll do one last one, Kev. How about the one from Daniel Keys from EOS Nation? He also wrote it offline here in the chat. How do we prevent vote buying? Because cheaters are going to cheat.
I'm working on a story that expresses exactly how vote buying could be punished. All of the hooks are there in the draft constitution and in the arbitration mechanisms. The short version is simply this. If you can prove that somebody paid for votes or even attempted to pay for votes, then that act by definition harms the chain, which means you as a community member have a cause of action against them and could take them to arbitration, which they would have to respond to. And they could, if they lose the arbitration, which if you've got proof, then they would lose. Could be a fine. It could be, their account could be frozen for a period of time. Maybe if they were a block producer, they could be, taken out of block production for a while. And a fine could be substantial. It could be 10% of their tokens. For a whale, that'd be terrifying, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. And certainly, if I had a lot of tokens and I was thinking of vote buying, I'd ask myself, how many tokens do I want to put at risk? Because if you start breaking the rules by buying votes, if an arbitrator rules against you, then those tokens are gone. They're gonna file the order. Your account's either going to be frozen or you'll be required to put some of those tokens into an at-risk account in order to keep the rest of your tokens active, and they just might get burned. They'd either put them into a community benefit fund, burn the tokens, maybe give some of them to the whistleblower as a reward. And I promise you, if we start rewarding whistleblowers with a portion of confiscated tokens, you won't be able to trust anybody you're trying to buy votes from, because it'd be so much more lucrative to turn you in and get 10% of the 10% fine. If you've got 1 million tokens, it's 10% is 100,000. I get 10,000 tokens for turning you in, or 20 cents for voting for you. Let me hang on. Let me think.
Yeah.
So it could get really dangerous to even contemplate buying votes in a scenario like that. So that's the kind of dynamic we want to introduce.
It sounds like there are multiple things to come that we don't even know about yet, and this is just a common. Even Vitalik from Ethereum wrote a blog post about this last week about how he feels like DPoS cannot be trusted because of vote buying and all this and that, and malicious.
Well, certainly if it were implemented the way Ethereum's implemented, you'd have a real challenge because. No, I'm not criticizing Ethereum. I mean, come on, that we are standing on the shoulders of giants here. Okay, Ethereum's amazing.
I agree.
Right? It's like the fact that it even exists is incredible. Like, I mean, think about that when you first started reading about blockchain. You're like, what? A Turing complete machine on a block? What?
Wow.
So cool. It's like,
Mind
and then
blown.
5 minutes later, you're like, oh, well, they don't do it right. Oh, come on. That's like being in an airplane with Wi-Fi, and then the Wi-Fi stops, and you're like, "What's wrong with it?" It's like, you're in the sky. Okay, you're flying like a god. You're flying like a god through the sky, and the internet's not as good as you. Come on.
Surfing in the plane.
Yeah. So, which by the way I do. So, I mean, sure, if we had the code is the law, then you'd have to find a way to code every contingency to try to maybe stop vote buying, and you'd never get there. You'd be doomed. But in a governance organized model where the intention of contracts is more important than the execution, where you can take someone to arbitration, and if you win the arbitration, they put in an arbitration order, 15 block producers sign it because it's properly formed and correct. It goes into a 30-day waiting queue, which gives you a chance to appeal. And then boom, whatever the order is, it happens. And if that's confiscation of tokens, then kiss those tokens goodbye. They're gone. And so maybe you can't prevent that on a, the code is the law style chain, but you can sure as shooting do it on a governed chain. That's what makes a governed chain qualitatively different. That's why we are a new beast. And I don't think people really quite understand that yet, not fully. Although clearly Yves LaRose does.
Yeah. Yeah, he does. So, well, we have a question from our own top K-pop. How are arbitrators decided upon? And in order to stay arbitrators, do they get watched, evaluated to make sure they stay up to standard?
Right. So let's make sure we differentiate between arbitrators and moderators. It's a very common confusion. A moderator is an elected position from a community to do like making sure that posts aren't abusive and they can like take posts off or censor people who are posting things on a forum that don't conform to standards. Moderating and arbitrating are totally different. An arbitrator has to be trained and is typically, here's what you would typically do is, let's say you and I were in a transaction, and in the smart contract, it will say that we agree that any disputes arising from our transaction will be decided in the EOS Go arbitration forum, which is a different forum from maybe the International Marshmallow Trade Forum. Who knows? I made that up. So the EOS Go forum consists of a group of arbitrators and an arbitration manager, if you will, who sees the case. Right, one of us arbitrates, one of us files a case against the other. We have a complaint. It goes to the clearinghouse, if you will. They assign the next available arbitrator, and then we can ask that arbitrator questions to make sure they don't have a conflict of interest. And if we can't prove they have a conflict, then we get that arbitrator. It's whoever's next in line, and that person's been trained. And then they would hear both our cases, for and against, and they might have clarifying questions, or one of us might see the other's words and say, hey, wait, I want to comment on what he said. So it could take weeks to like really pull this all out and make sure everyone gets fully heard. And then the arbitrator issues a ruling. And if there's a lot of dollars at stake, or it's very high profile in some other way, not only are we going to be paying a fee for this person's time, because this could be a lot of time, they could take a portion of their fee and hire a professional arbitrator from the community or from a list of providers that we're working on assembling right now, because you want deep arbitration experience on something that's really like, $1 million case. Yeah, I think we want to bring in some outside experts. But that arbitrator, after studying and getting outside help and so forth, is going to write a ruling, and that ruling is it. Now, you could appeal it, but you'd have to have a really strong case. And a lot of arbitrators won't take that case. They'll look at it and say, yeah, no, this was well decided. I'm not gonna listen to you. Or they might say, well, I'll hear your appeal, but you'll have to pay me 10 times as much as the last fee was, because I don't really feel like getting into this. And at some point, you run out of appeals because no one wants to work with you. That's the short version. There's some really good information on this at the International Center for Dispute Resolution, which is currently that's what we're looking at. We're thinking of just taking their rule set and using it as our default rule set as well, because it's very well recognized. It's recognized by the United Nations. It's recognized by the laws of over 180 countries. When disputes are decided using their rule set, they've stood up in courts all around the world as binding, valid, and final. So there's basically any question you have about arbitration. What about this and what about that? It's all been handled. It's all been figured out. This is not new to the blockchain, folks. Arbitration's been around for decades. Okay, we're just doing the same thing.
And another question by Daniel Keys of EOS Nation along these lines: could arbitration be turned against people, for example, in a case where the arbitrator disagrees with my ideas?
Well, disagreeing with your ideas is one thing, but deciding the facts of a case is another. So certainly if an arbitrator was clearly biased in some way, and then that bias showed up in a faulty ruling, you totally have a perfectly good case for an appeal. And if someone found themselves an arbitrator, they're going to be trained. And if they have like a real, like a personal emotional issue with your content, they should recuse themselves, and the next arbitrator in the queue should get your case.
Sure. And it will be arbitration for the arbitrators, correct?
Bear in mind, there's nothing we're doing here that's in any way, different or unique or bizarre. I mean, arbitration's been going on for decades. Look in the phone book, arbitrator and the name of your city, and you'll get a list of dozens or hundreds of people who've been doing arbitration for years. Yep. Super straightforward, folks. Super straightforward.
Awesome. I think that's it, right, Kevin? Is there anything else that we forgot?
Yeah, we're running out of time here in terms of what we're able to ask from Mr. Cox. But as always, we really appreciate. What should we tell everybody about questions you'd like to answer in the coming weeks here? Right.
So let's see. Bear in mind that just because I said it doesn't make it true. These are my opinions and my best memory of what I've been reading and so on. So nothing I say is binding on anybody, including me, frankly. And I am doing my absolute best to give you full, complete, and accurate answers. I'm not a spokesperson for any company. This is just me making time to do my best to help the community. If you have any questions on any aspect of the community, and in particular, I think we should be thinking about, how can I help the arbitration process move forward? We need people not to volunteer to be arbitrators, because that almost never works well, but people to nominate other people to be arbitrators. Who do you trust? Who would you be willing to be judged by? Me personally, I'm thinking Bluejays, except Bluejays is involved in EOS Go, and the division of labor requires that block producers can't be arbitrators, and members of the Fourth Estate, the press, probably shouldn't be block producers or arbitrators, either one, which is sad.
Yeah,
you'd be good, man. I think you'd be good. You're calm, thoughtful, and even-tempered. Sam Saposnik is one of my favorite guys in the community in terms of just being a thoughtful, analytical. If he were my arbitrator, I'd be thrilled. Even if he ruled against me, I know I'd take his opinion over mine, frankly.
He's very thorough. He's a thorough person.
He's a deep thinker, and that's what I look for when I think of who I want to judge me. And there's probably a handful of others just off the top of my head I could think of. So who would you pick? And we're going to have an arbitration orientation coming up here in a couple weeks, where we'll talk people through it and see how they'd like to help. I know we'll need help on the software side. We're probably going to need some kind of user interface. We're going to need some organizational assistance and so forth, because, of course, the arbitration organization has to be a standalone, independent, community-driven thing. The only thing that I and my employer can do is encourage and suggest and maybe plant some seeds. It's really up to the community to do the heavy lifting, and we're turning to you. And the block producers have shown just how incredibly dynamic this community is in terms of attacking problems and coming up with solutions. The application creators are doing amazing things. I think the arbitrators are going to do the same.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. And I agree about Sam as well. That's a good call.
So thank you all very much. I'm going to sign off while you guys do your close. And thank you again for this incredibly important service that you provide as information clearing service for our community.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks, Mr. Cox.
Yep.
Ciao.